In 1987, sci-fi horror fans were gifted one of the best movies in the genre, in the form of John McTiernan's Predator, which somehow manages to pull off being both a survival action movie and an extraterrestrial slasher flick. Even if you're not old enough to have been around for its initial release, Predator remains one of the kings of the jungle for movie geeks. The film introduced a fascinating antagonist, an intergalactic hunter who's looking to match up with the deadliest animal on Earth. Man. Not just any man, of course, but Arnold freaking Schwarzenegger. While the movie didn't explain a ton about its alien warrior, the hints were there that his species had a tantalizing backstory rife with possibilities. And since the movie was a box office hit, ending the year as the 10th biggest theatrical release, there was little doubt that we'd be getting a sequel. But just what kind of sequel would it be? You probably don't have time to bleed, but you surely have time to find out just what happened to Predator 2.
It's alright, I'm a cop.
I don't think he gives a shit.
The first film screenwriters, Jim and John Thomas, were prepared when the time came to pitch a sequel. According to the brothers, they came up with 5 or 6 potential ideas. One of them was even set during World War II, and would have seen German and American soldiers teaming up to fight the Predator. Now that sounds awesome, and who knows, we still might get to see that come to life one day. But 20th Century Fox wasn't going for it. What they did take a shine to was the idea of transferring the action from the literal jungle to the urban jungle. The studio felt that switching the setting would keep the overall concept fresh, and greenlit the sequel. Returning to produce was Joel Silver, the infamously blustery producer behind several of the biggest franchises in the 80s. Silver had noticed a young and up-and-coming director named Stephen Hopkins, who'd made an impact with an impressive Australian horror film called Dangerous Game, and who was, at the time, working on New Line Cinema's fifth Nightmare on Elm Street, Dream Child. Ultimately, Hopkins found the job of directing Dream Child a very difficult one, thanks to a rushed schedule and dwindling budget. So he was looking forward to working on a film with a proper amount of money, and the time to do it. When Hopkins agreed to direct Predator 2, he was immediately paired with the Thomas brothers, and added his own ideas to the concept. Naturally, everyone expected Arnie to return as Dutch, one of the 2 survivors of the Predator massacre. An early concept for Predator 2's opening scene would have taken place at the site of the first Predator's self-destruction, where another Predator finds his fallen brother's ARM computer thingy and learns exactly what went down in that jungle. He'd then focus in on Dutch, realizing that he was the man who did the impossible and came out on top of that fight. This new Predator would then go on to hunt for Dutch, leading him to LA, where Dutch teams up with a world-weary cop to defeat this new adversary. Sounds pretty cool, huh? Unfortunately, as you well know, Arnie would not be back. But why? There are 2 possible answers. Director Stephen Hopkins would go on to say that none other than James Cameron discouraged Arnie from doing Predator 2 because he thought it would make the upcoming Terminator 2 less special. The idea being that Arnie's return for another sequel right before T2 would dampen the novelty of the Cameron film. But producer John Davis has another reason, one of the oldest in the book: money. According to a 2022 interview with the producer, the studio and Arnie's people were locked in a stalemate over a $250,000 raise. Seems like a pittance in the large scheme of things, but the head of Fox at the time, Joe Roth, was not willing to go past a certain number, and Arnie was, at the time, one of the most recognizable actors on the planet. But that was not enough to sway Roth, and the 2 sides went their separate ways. Before that, Hopkins had been on the hunt for the actor who would play the tough LA cop. Patrick Swayze has always been associated with the role, but there's little to suggest that he was ever seriously considered. A name that can definitely be linked to the part is Steven Seagal, who was incredibly interested in playing the role. According to Hopkins, he went to Seagal's house and met with the eccentric actor, who wanted to change the character from streetwise detective to a CIA psychiatrist who studied martial arts. Yep, sounds like Seagal. Hopkins left the meeting thinking the man was crazy, and even turned down the opportunity to go to a grenade launching range with him. And that's as close as Steven got to starring in Predator 2. Now, with Arnie out of the picture, the character of Mike Harrigan would become the lead protagonist, and the Thomas brothers got to work retooling the script to reflect the change. Meanwhile, producer Joel Silver brought in a familiar face to play the part, Danny Glover, now a marquee name thanks to his appearance in the hugely successful Lethal Weapon movies. According to Hopkins, having an African American as the lead in an action movie was a somewhat controversial decision at the time, which is utterly crazy to consider if true. Regardless, Glover was a recognizable face that audiences would immediately associate with hard-hitting action. To prepare, Danny trained for 5 weeks leading up to the shoot, lifting weights and running 4 miles a day, 6 days a week to get into shape for what was going to be a very physical role. Not to get ahead of ourselves, but Glover would later say that he was a wreck after the shoot, tending to a pulled hamstring and needing surgery on both knees, amongst many other ailments. Another Lethal Weapon vet was brought in to play mysterious government scientist Peter Keyes, Gary Busey. 2 years prior, Busey had been in a terrible motorcycle accident that almost killed him. Predator 2 was to be his first film since his long recovery process. A changed man, Busey would talk to anyone who'd listen about his near-death experience, claiming he'd seen angels and the Grim Reaper during a brief trip to the afterlife. Despite his eccentricities, Busey proved to be a ball of energy and strong collaborator while on set.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
I tell you what I believe. Shit happens.
Shooting took place in Los Angeles starting in February of 1990. Filming would be spread out all over downtown LA, with plenty of work being done inside Fox's studios for more elaborate sequences. Shooting in LA was not exactly California dreamin' for cast and crew, however. Those streets were mean back in the late 80s and early 90s, and even though they were part of a fairly large studio production, the folks working on Predator 2 felt far from safe most of the time. One guy was even so annoyed at the production's late-night noisiness that he stood atop a nearby roof and fired his gun in their general direction. Clearly, not everyone in LA is into showbiz. Another adversary for the production would be the rats, who were allegedly as big as dogs. The rats would seemingly be in every nook and cranny of the downtown streets, freaking out cast and crew alike. Hollywood ain't all glitz and glamour, folks, even for the big franchises. Returning to the Predator universe was 7-foot actor Kevin Peter Hall, who donned the iconic Stan Winston outfit in the first film. When inside the suit, which weighed approximately 100 pounds, Hall would be about 8 feet tall. That heavy suit was no picnic for Hall, who fainted more than once while working. To add insult to injury, during breaks, Kevin wasn't even allowed to take off most of the suit because it took too long to put back on, so removing just the helmet was the only relief that he could get. Stan Winston and his crew were of course back for the sequel. Winston himself was the lead makeup artist, despite the fact that he was very busy with Tim Burton's Edward Scissorhands at the time. Not to mention, he was gearing up for Cameron's Terminator sequel. Winston's reason for returning was that he was so proud of his work on the first Predator that he didn't think that it would be right for anyone else to come in to work on his creation. Plus, the sequel gave Winston and his crew an opportunity to tweak and finesse things about the first design, in addition to adding a more colorful overall look to the creature. This Predator, as imagined by the writers and Hopkins, is younger, more ambitious, and more reckless than his counterpart in the first film. He's out to prove himself to his brethren, which is why he chooses LA as his hunting ground. Naturally, his impulsiveness means he's not quite ready for his final showdown with Detective Harrigan, as the latter gets the upper hand, pun intended, on his foe. For the scene where Harrigan and the Predator hang off an LA rooftop and the cop chops off the alien's arm, the production hired a stuntman who actually only had one arm, and put him in the suit for those sequences, where the creature's noticeably missing the limb. It was a harrowing shoot for Glover, who, despite being afraid of heights, really did hang precariously off the roof to accomplish the scene. The most expensive and ambitious sequence in the film takes place inside the Predator spaceship, which is somehow nestled underneath an apartment building. We don't ask questions about stuff like that. After Harrigan defeats the Predator, he's more than a little surprised to find there are 9 more Predators in his midst. Naturally, Stan Winston's crew had a lot of work on their hands, crafting 9 additional Predator suits. The Elder Predator, who tosses Harrigan a small trophy from the past, actually has the small head from the first film, just redesigned a bit to make him look older. Since it wasn't easy to find 9 actors who were very tall, the production found help in the surprising form of the LA Lakers. Danny Glover was a fan of the team and reached out to see if any of them wanted to suit up for the film, and they did. By now, you've probably seen the famous video of the Predators getting their dance on, but it never really gets old. And when you consider just how heavy those suits were, it's more than a little impressive to watch some of those moves. And here's one last fact about this scene. These are referred to as the Lost Predators because the suits ended up disappearing not long after production wrapped. How you lose 9 Predator costumes is beyond me, but let's not be surprised if a few of them wound up in the houses of some ex-basketball players. Another neat addition to the sequence was the presence of a familiar-looking animal skull, that of a xenomorph. Since the Alien and Predator franchises were both owned by Fox, Stan Winston thought that it would be a fun Easter egg to toss in. When the movie was finished and post-production was done, the final cut was sent to the MPAA for what was expected to be an R rating. Instead, the organization slapped the film with an NC-17. According to Hopkins, they were absolutely appalled by the gore in the film. The studio had to send the film back over and over again, an estimated 20 times before finally receiving an R rating. Sadly, it doesn't appear as though we'll ever get to see the uncut version of the film. Predator 2 opened right in time for Thanksgiving in 1990. It opened reasonably well, making over $8 million at the domestic box office, when another Fox release, Home Alone, was well on its way to becoming a huge hit. Predator 2's second weekend saw it drop more than 50%, and ultimately the movie wasn't a big success, grabbing an estimated $54 million worldwide. Compare that to the first film making $100 million worldwide off of a smaller budget, and the sequel was considered a disappointment. We don't have to tell you the critics weren't exactly enamored with it either. Over the years, however, the film has amassed a cult following. There's no doubt it's a different beast from its predecessor, and that's a good thing. It has a gritty, give-no-shits personality of its own, with some terrific horror set pieces and a very entertaining cast. For those who were hoping it would be a replica of the original, well, you know what they say.
Shit happens.